Well, welcome to the Christ-centered Cosmic Civilization as we're continuing to examine the Magi. And this week, we're going to look at something called the Armenian Infancy Gospel. And it's not perhaps quite as early as the revelation of the Magi, but PJ from the Global Church History Project is going to tell us why this... Well, how early is it? What translations of it do we have? Is it worth paying attention to, or is it just a later fabrication?
So it only exists in an Armenian translation from the 6th century. So that's as late as it could possibly be. So that's it can't be any later than that. So anything that's in here that people often think, oh, this is a very late medieval sort of idea, that has been pushed back a lot. So there's definitely that. It's draws on it. What it tries to do is find as many different traditions about the early life of Jesus, about Mary and Joseph and all of that, and put it all together into a coherent narrative that's all agreeing, so that they've just tried to understand what really went on, and they've got their best sort of scholars to bring things together. So the revelation of the Magi that we've already looked at, that's one of the sources. And particularly interestingly, this Armenian Infancy Gospel is dealing with two traditions where you've got 3 kings and then you've got 12 that we looked at last time. And the solution it has, so we don't know whether it came up with a solution or if it's using an earlier source, we don't know. But it's got a good solution, which is that you've got 3 sort of emperors of very big regions, and they've got like 12 commanders or kings underneath them, so that you've got a sort of hierarchy, and then that means you get to the full 15 that people expect from the prophecy of Micah, so that works together quite well. Obviously, because of that prophecy of Micah, you think maybe that came first, the idea that you got 3 and 12, or maybe they thought, wait a second, that makes sense when you've got, who knows which way around it was. But that's kind of what it's doing a lot. So it's got a lot of... There's another infancy gospel called the Infancy Gospel of James, and a huge part of the Armenian Infancy Gospel is just directly from that, because that may be 1st century, it may be 2nd century. That's a very early one, so that's obviously going to be the basis for a lot of stuff.
So this Armenian Infancy Gospel, we have it in translation from the 500s, so it can't be any later than that. It seems to be gathering together earlier material, and then you're saying some of that earlier material clearly is from, say, 1st century or 2nd century. So as a whole, then, the document is giving us an insight into very early traditions or even historical witnesses about the Magi.
And it's worth noting that there's loads of stuff we know was out there that we don't have access to anymore, like St. Papias wrote his 5 tomes and then loads of other books, but he's got his 5 tomes commenting on the prophecies Jesus made. But you've also got St. Hegesippus the Nazarene, and he interviewed the family of God. And so when he gives descriptions of the Holy Family, when he says what they did and all of that, that's a family tradition. And, obviously people might exaggerate accomplishments, but then when it comes to Jesus, it's hard to. He always does the absolute best thing. So out there, at the time, very widely circulating, was these interviews with the family of God. The
Holy Family, yeah.
Yeah. The great grandnephews of Jesus through Jude and James and others.
And that's interesting, because we know that people talk to Mary and Joseph and this extended family at the time, and so you would expect there to be records of these conversations and people saying, oh, what was it like bringing up God, and what sort of a kid was he, and like all those sort of questions. And we know, like, Ignatius just openly says he wants to ask Mary those sort of questions. So the fact that there were historical accounts from the Holy Family about the events that happened, of course there will be. Of course there will be. And it's always struck me as slightly strange if people say, oh, I don't think there was anything like that. Like, and you think, well, that's extremely unbelievable that nobody asked the Holy Family any questions at all about what had happened, or in fact, these Magi, like, this would have been the greatest experience of their whole lives. So obviously, they must have recorded something to do with it in journals or wrote letters saying, hey, listen, I've had an incredible experience. I've did this journey and I met this kid who was God. There obviously will have been written accounts. So, well, when we get into this one, it starts on January the 8th, basically, with the Magi from the east arriving in Jerusalem. And they've been traveling for 9 months. So they were set off on their journey, really, at the time when Jesus is conceived, back in March, or I think the revelation of the Magi had them actually setting off on April the 1st. So they maybe needed a week to get all their stuff together and then set off. Here, they're named as Melkon, king of the Persians, Caspar, king of the Indians, Balthazar, king of the Arabians, and with them 12 commanders, each of whom brought 1,000 soldiers with them. So the entire company is these 3 superior kings, under them 12 lesser kings, princes, generals, whatever. With them 1,000 men, soldiers. Melkon is coming from Persia, Caspar's coming from India, Balthazar from Arabia. PJ, what about that? And does this mean we just forget the China stuff that was in Revelation of the Magi?
So I think we have to think this is a scholar at some point, maybe the 3rd century, maybe the 4th century, trying to make sense of different accounts that have come down. And so, as we said, we know there must have been accounts from genuine interviews, and like Saint Hegesippus, we all know he did interview the relatives of God, but so there's that sort of stuff floating around. He's just trying to make sense of this, put this all together. So there are other sources who put these kings in different places. So Balthazar very often gets made the king of Ethiopia.
So that would, because Yemen, Arabia, Yemen, Ethiopia, they're all linked together, and Midian is an example of that.
Yeah,
right?
And they were one state at the time. So that's one where we look back and we're like, oh, it looks like there's a contradiction. But actually, as we study more, we find actually this was all one big empire. The Carabate, this was all... Yeah, one, and it stretched all the way down to Mozambique. So it's a huge sort of empire. That's one thing, Arabia. So that's one of the things where we think, wait a second, there seems to be contradictions here. This guy might be doing a really good job.
And that fact that Arabia and Ethiopia are linked, you get that, don't you? Because after Muhammad, the Islamic colonialists are invading other countries and setting up their colonies. There's the Ethiopian emperor, isn't there, who tries to invade Yemen with an elephant army or something. What's that?
So that happened a bit before Muhammad, but it was...
Right.
There was a Jewish king of the Himyarites, and he starts brutal persecutions of Christians. So the martyrs of Najran, he's responsible for that. He's called like the king with the locks, because they get the side locks in that sort of rabbinic Judaism. So he does that, and then this Ethiopian emperor, the Ethiopian emperor had just let Yemen do its own thing, because there'd been a dispute and they'd fallen out, and they said, we'll just let them do that and we won't. But they were like, this is too bad, we've got to intervene, kind of breaking with a lot of ancient laws and everything. But like, this is too bad. So they do go in, and so then it becomes much more centralized state. And then
it clearly shows the linkage of the Arabian Peninsula with the Ethiopian Empire and so on.
And all the Ethiopian emperors before that point, because Sheba is in Yemen, but all the Ethiopian emperors call themselves kings of Sheba and Axum.
So that proves it. Yeah. So Balthazar, he's... Because the models that are at St. John's Leytonstone Church, where they'll have the nativity scene, they have him as, he's a black African. So that's Balthazar, isn't it, on that scene? What about these other two? Melkon of Persia and Caspar. Now, he doesn't always have the name Caspar. Let's think of him quickly. What he has he seems to have several different names. Like you call him Gondophar, but here he's Caspar of India.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
So he's pretty incredible. He's the best attested historically. You know, we've got coins of him. We've got monuments that he's written. He's mentioned in literary sources. He's very well known in the ancient world. So at the time you got the Parthian Empire. Because what happened, you had Alexander the Great invades Persia and makes it a bit more Hellenic. But he doesn't manage to fully control Central Asia. He gets parts of it, all the way to the border of, like, what China's sometimes claimed. But he doesn't really enforce it. So the Parthians are kind of outside the Greek sphere. So as the sort of Greek hegemony over Persia gets weakened, the Parthians come with, like, a totally un-Greek way of being Persian, sort of, or Iranic, and they come in and they kind of restore the Persian Empire. But it gets called the Parthian Empire because people are like, oh, is it really Persian? Because you're actually Central Asians, you're Parthians. So that's what happens there. And they set up a load of noble families. One of them's called the House of Surin, and they have loads of privileges, and one of them basically gives them privilege over ruling India. And this Gondophar, he rules India, and then he rebels and makes it an independent empire, the Indo Parthian Empire, based in Taxila, which is called the Alexandria of the East, and Athens of the East. It gets called these names. I think it's now in Afghanistan. But he rules over Pakistan and like parts of India, and you know, it's a huge empire,
A huge Central Asian empire.
and he founds it like in teens or 20s, you know, very early. He does quite quickly do that. So he's a huge name, and he's from the House of Surin. What's that quite interesting about that? The person who evangelized Armenia, Saint Gregory the Illuminator, he's of the House of Surin, and he knew a lot about Caspar. And so Caspar had a tomb he made in Armenia, and there was all sorts of details he'd left there, but there's also family law that Gregory knew. So Armenia has a very particular connection that the House of Surin remained important in Armenia, and you know, they were Christianized by it, and so their faith has been handed on from this Caspar, even though they're in a different continent. There's that connection.
Do you think it's plausible that at least, say, some of his command, because he has like he'll have 4 commanders under him, won't he, in order to get to this, like, the could any of those come from China though?
Well, this more comes from Melkon.
Melkon. Let's move to Melkon then.
Melkon or Melchior. He's the one that no one really seems to agree where he's from.
Right.
So yeah, with Caspar we have loads of monuments, and we've got
coins.
all of
You
that.
have one of his coins.
Yeah. He's got so much stuff out there that we know exactly where he's from. And Balthazar, as we thought, all these
lots
connections.
of stuff. Yeah.
So we know where all of those are from. Whereas Melchior or Melkon, that does change a lot from account to account. So obviously when you've got Magi rolling up, the Magi or the Magians are the priests of the Zoroastrian religion. So people do often default to, they're like, well, if you've got to have a Persian there, and that makes sense. I suppose the difficulty is we don't have a clear Melchior who's alive, who's the Shah, because that's a very well-known position. We know exactly who is Shah at any point, meaning the King of Kings, the Shah of Shahs.
This podcast and all my work depends entirely on donations. It's only through your support that all this research and teaching can be free for so many. If you're in a position to help, please consider supporting the mission by giving to the Biblical Frameworks charity. Find out how at biblicalframeworks.com and look for the Give link. Thank you.
So it's not obvious that Melchior could be one of those, and it's a very turbulent time. They live quite short amounts of time, but we know Thomas baptizes all the emperors and their sons, the kings. So that would make us think, is it somewhere else? Is it somewhere more towards like
China.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we thought from, the revelation of the Magi, we do have a huge... Basically, the 12 commanders from the revelation of the Magi seem to be sent from these other kings to China. So there's a huge China connection there.
So you can understand, like, if a person's compiling all this in the 2nd century, say, and they're like, well, the Persia's the big power to the east, so obviously one of them came from there.
Yeah.
But it's not, that's...
And in particular, because the Armenians are always trying to figure out more about the Magi, so this isn't their last attempt to make a definitive account. When the Mongols came, they found Tibeto Burman groups of people were with them who claimed descent from one of the wise men. And so that's an interesting thing. It would just be Tibetan relatives and Qiang relatives that are in China. But then also when Spanish and Portuguese people were sailing around India and they got into Burma, they found there were people there who claimed descent from one of the wise men. And so at the time they were like, oh, these seem like conflicting traditions. But as we thought with the Arabians and the Ethiopians, it actually reveals in the 1st century, this was one group of people. And they now have this term Tibeto-Burmese for every, Tibet, the Qiang, and then down into Burma. This was all one group of people. So you could have an emperor then. So all these later things, they're like, oh, these seems like contradictions. Are they the sort of Naaman Mongols, or are they the Qiang, or is it the Burmese? They were one people group, one empire in the 1st century. So my personal theory is that's Melchior. He's the emperor of them.
That I like that. That makes sense of a lot of the traditions and history and so on. So we've got Melkon here. The Armenians call him the king of the Persians. We'll say he's Chinese, Tibetan, Burman. There's Caspar, Gondophares of India, Pakistan, that region. Balthazar, he's Ethiopia, Yemen, that region. They're converging. They've each got, say, 4 leaders, and it's as if they all kind of converge, and initially they're meeting up. We know there's the cave of the hidden mysteries, kind of, the treasures. So that's where they kind of, and we think it looks as if that was in China. And so they're all converge there, and then eventually travel together. So that's what it is. And they all, in this Armenian account, we don't, like in the other account, we had that enormous backstory that goes right back to Adam and all the rituals they were doing throughout the many generations they were waiting. Here, it just has them. They all get together, they travel for 9 months, they're outside Jerusalem. But remember, they've got 12,000 men, soldiers. And these 12,000 soldiers, presumably, there'd be 4,000 of these more Chinese soldiers, 4,000 Indians, and 4,000 Africans. So with all the associated different styles of armor and weapons, and like the caravan, so maybe camels, there may be elephants, there may be all kinds of things coming. Wow, it would be quite something.
And that sort of deals, for a lot of people, when we hear them today and they bring up objections to the idea of the 3 kings, they often say, oh, if you just had 3 people, then all of Jerusalem and all the lands around it won't be disturbed like we see in the Gospel of Matthew, that they all get disturbed. Whereas if you do have over 10,000, and you even have some other accounts where as they're going through, because they're holy, they can see the light that's coming from the stars. Other people who have been waiting for Jesus can see the star, and they join this train, so it gets even bigger in some accounts. But it's obviously bringing that up, that you've got to have a lot of people for everyone to get disturbed.
Bishop Daniel Yohanan, the son of Metropolitan KP Yohanan, I was talking to him this week. He's from the Believers Eastern Church in India. And we were talking about the Magi, and he was saying this very thing, that there would have been this huge... And he says there was one of the Aladdin films that he watched, and Aladdin, like wants to be like as if he's like an emperor, and there's this huge like group of, you know, the genie provides this massive caravan of people and silks and baggage trains and all these courtiers with him. And he was just pointing out that once you understand that sort of context, that's what it would have been like. And when they arrived at Jerusalem, there's all like representatives of like huge empires with all their culture and traditions and courtiers and soldiers. It would be a massive, massive occurrence. And Jerusalem is absolutely rocked by it when they arrive. So it seems fair point.
Yeah, and we thought how, like, in China, it was still known that the reason Jupiter, the planet Jupiter, gets associated with the king of the gods and everything is because it has all these moons around it, like the most moons of any planet. So you've got to have a huge train that's impressive and visible. And that's why, you know, that's necessary to make it clear that you're a king. So if the prophet's looking forward to seeing this king and all of that, they must know there has to be a train. You can't just sort of be...
Yeah.
And, you know, Jesus, the King of Jews, he does get the 12 disciples and the 72, and they may not be dressed exactly like they imagine the courtiers of the King of Kings to be, but they, you know, you always have a train of people with you.
Yeah, and Jesus' ascension and everything, it's all got that in. So they arrive, but once they get to Jerusalem, this is in the Armenian Infancy Gospel, the star disappears. So they're at Jerusalem, and it says, when King Herod saw the massive army camped around the city, he was greatly alarmed. And the Bible says the whole city is totally alarmed with this massive arrival of international forces. So Herod, who's in this account, he sounds quite a cowardly person. He appoints like princes to go and do negotiating for him, because why doesn't he just go out and meet them properly? But he doesn't do that. He's not a good character.
But his son Archelaus is more... and
you like him, yeah.
Because the people often know... Because Archelaus, what he's famous for is he was supposed to be made king after Herod, and then the people reject him, so then he goes away to Rome, and then he like comes back, and all the people that he rejected him, he kills, and all the people that were favourable to him, he gives cities. And Jesus seems to
reference that story in a parable
as a goodie, and he does it at where his palace was. He's one in Jericho.
In Jericho, yeah.
So there is actually a Christian tradition of liking Archelaus, and so, you know, somewhat rare, but we see it here, so it's worth noting just to know that's a thing.
Herod's not so good, but he's got a good son. Well, Herod sends out these princes, and then there's a kind of extended negotiation between these princes and the Magi with all their armies. And they're very nervous because they're like, "What? You're camped here. What are you after?" And then they're like, "Is it you're after? Do you want is it friendship or hostility, or are you merchants who've come to trade?" And then the princes say, "You carry with you every desirable fragrance of flowers. Do you wish to have a large place to trade your treasures?" But the Magi insisted, "It is not as you assume. We have nothing to trade. All we seek is our way. We're just looking for directions." And then the prince is like, "What are you looking for?" And then they explain, "We've come here by God's command, and this is the 9th month, and a star has guided us until today. And the star was with us to this place, but now its light is hidden, and we don't know what to do." Okay, so then Herod discovers all this, and he's still worried about why they have so many armies and so many resources. I'll read again from the Armenian Infancy Gospel. It says this: "The Magi explained, 'We came here for this reason and wish to inquire of you. We heard in our own land that a king's son is born in the land of Judea, and we have come to worship him.' Hearing this, Herod became enraged and very afraid. He asked, 'From whom did you hear this, or who told you?' And then the Magi replied, 'We have this written and sealed testimony from our ancestors. For a long time, our fathers and their sons after them instructed us about this written word that's been passed down and is now fulfilled for us. Furthermore, by God's command, through an angel who appeared to us, we have come to this place which the Lord has shown us.
We've had more details about that.
I was just going to say.
Yeah, the revelation of the Magi does seem to have... So this is them... They've just got the dialogue. Presumably this is St. Gregory, and he's got all the old, accounts and everything left by his ancestor Gondophares. But, so he's just got that end. But we've got their whole diaries that they left in China. We've just read through that. So, you put it all together. It is interesting seeing the coherence, between them. But, yeah, so he's just summarising all of that, the ancient accounts, and from Seth. And all, although I think he goes into Seth a bit more.
Yeah, because Herod wants to get this writing. He's like, where's this writing that you alone possess? And the Magi explain, no other nation knows about it. Only our nation has this testimony. And then they explain them what's in it. This is what they say. After Adam's expulsion from the garden and Cain's killing of Abel, the Lord God gave Seth to Adam as a son for consolation. This document was with him, written, shut, and sealed by the finger of God. Seth received it from his father and gave it to his sons, who passed it down through generations. They were commanded to guard the document carefully until the time of Noah. Noah gave it to his son Shem, and so on until it reached Abraham. Abraham gave it to the high priest Melchizedek. And from then on it came to us through Cyrus, the king of Persia, and our ancestors who received it kept it in a chamber with reverence. Thus the document was passed to us, and we brought this writing to present to the newly given king, the son of the king of Israel. So that's interesting. The document, they give more about the specific way in which the document was passed down via Cyrus and then to the Cave of Treasures.
Yeah, and there's an odd group in Armenia at the time called the Melchizedekians, and we've often thought about them, but maybe we haven't talked about them too much on the podcast. But they basically believe... The thing everyone got angry with them at the time was that they would celebrate Easter on the 14th day, and that's a huge...
Crazy!
Yeah. But they're more distinctive doctrine, and it's odd it didn't get more attention at the time. It did afterwards, but they believe like Jesus incarnated possibly more than once, and that Melchizedek could be a previous incarnation, and then Jesus lives and dies, and then later he incarnates again. Kind of like you do in Narnia, how you've got all these different worlds. You get Aslan as like an incarnation of Jesus, but that sort of idea where it's like he just pops up.
He becomes flesh many times, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, possibly, but then they also maybe just Jesus beforehand, maybe without incarnating, just lived on Earth physically and visibly for a while.
Because those Melchizedekians tended to... They didn't think of God as immaterial at all. They felt God was substantial and solid.
Yeah.
So the idea of Melchizedek just being God walking around, they were big on that.
Yeah.
So the Melchizedekians wanted to get Melchizedek in, and the document he looked after for a while, but eventually it goes to Cyrus, and then from Cyrus to a chamber with reverence, which we're like, we know what that is.
Yeah.
It's on the mountain of mysteries in the chamber of hidden secrets and everything. And then they brought the document. That wasn't clear in the revelation of the Magi, that they brought the document, or maybe it was clear, but I missed it. Herod doesn't like this. He's like, no, I'm not having this. Like, because obviously he's not who they're looking for, whereas Herod thinks, I'm the king. They're like, no, it's not you. Archelaus then is trying to handle his dad, but then the Magi eventually want to know, well, where is the Messiah, the Christ, going to be born? And of course we know that they consult Micah chapter 5, and they find it, it's in Bethlehem. So Herod then says, okay, you guys go, verify this and then come back and then I'll come and worship him too. And then this account says, thus spoke the wicked tyrant, planning to have the child secretly killed. So the Magi immediately arose, bowed to Herod and the entire city of Jerusalem, and went on their way. And then it's interesting. It says, suddenly the star they had seen in the east appeared, leading them again until it stopped over the infant. So for the 6 miles from Jerusalem to Bethlehem, the star pops back and says, "You're right, let's go." So they arrived joyfully. I'm reading again now. They arrived joyfully in Bethlehem, dismounted, and immediately sounded their trumpets and played music in honor of the newborn child, the son of the King of Israel. And then the kings, the princes, and the armies danced and sang with loud voices. They praised God and gave thanks for being worthy to honor the day of that great mystery revealed to them. What's interesting about that to me is I think I got used to the idea, because it's on Christmas cards, is the idea that there were these like 3 magi who arrived kind of secretly. And it was a very low-key thing, and they just kind of slipped quietly in, and there's just a small group of people gathered around. But in this account, it's like they're playing music, dancing, there's 12,000 soldiers, and they're all making a huge deal. The kings, princes, and armies danced and sang with loud voices, playing trumpets. So Bethlehem would have been absolutely freaked out by this immense gathering of people. And of course, then it has Joseph and Mary were frightened and terrified. They ran away from the cave.
There's an interesting later account, but an interesting one where Joseph basically has to manage all the people, and they're like, all right, you can only come like 3 at a time or that sort of thing. So he sort of has it so that Mary doesn't get overwhelmed. But yeah, you definitely think if the crowd disturbs Jerusalem, which is a city, then a little village will be incredibly disturbed. It will be overwhelmed. So it's interesting that it's noticing these things that, as you're saying, like in the cards and stuff, maybe they miss this out. But maybe that the cards in the sense of drawing from that one where Joseph then has to manage them. So it's like, all right, you have to go in quietly, but like you can't wake the baby up. You can't, he's doing that a bit. And it's interesting that you got Mary is just focusing 100% on Jesus. And then Joseph has to kind of think, all right, I've got to look after Mary. And he's told to do this by the angel and everything. And that would be part of it, would be managing it. So maybe they can be reconciled, the two.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. I'll tell you what, we'll leave it there for this episode. Then when we come back, we'll see in this account, neither Joseph nor Mary are managing it very well. We'll see what they do. And we'll also perhaps just dig into a little bit more about these 3 original Magi. We've been trying to locate them. There's more to know about them, and we'll maybe do a little bit of that too. But we'll leave it there for this week.